Hi there and welcome to Money Talks, where we take a look at the rural economy as it affects you in the ag sector. In this edition, New Zealand's billion-dollar baby, the kiwi fruit industry, is under attack by a killer blight in the Bay of Plenty. Will it spread? And what's at stake for our growers, our exports, and our global sales? Selling off natural resources, whether it's prime farmland in New Zealand or potash in Canada. What's it mean for foreign investors when governments and prime ministers like Canada's Stephen Harper say no? You've got to ask, is protectionism on the rise around the world? And the global dairy top guns pour into Auckland for the World Dairy Summit. What's it mean for our biggest company, Fonterra? All this and much, much more coming up. But first, joining us to tell us more about the markets, the mayhem and the madness, ASB rural economist James Shortall. And we'll kick off with those rocketing wool prices. Seems only the exchange rate is holding them back. James, what do you reckon about the wool prices? Is it going to continue to rise and rise and rise?
Well, I mean, when you consider what's happening overseas with cotton prices, then that's a pretty good indicator of what's been happening with wool, and everything's looking really good. Just overnight, then cotton prices again have increased. 6 consecutive day where prices have increased to historic highs. We've talked a lot about commodity prices surging right through this year, but cotton has actually been the biggest gainer. It's up at around 90% right through this year. So phenomenal increases, and I think wool prices, that's sort of been a really underlying strength for wool prices, and it's going to continue to be a good thing, especially when you consider what's going on right through over the next 12 months. And I think there's a good story there for wool for sure.
Commodities in general are just running away with it. Coffee's way up. Gold, $14.21 US an ounce. What do you make of this? Even oil apparently is doing very well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess they're in a slightly different spaces. Gold, of course, is generally bought when people are a little bit concerned about what the economic outlook is, what inflation's going to do. It's sort of a steady investment. So that's why perhaps why gold has been increasing. But the other commodities has been related to fuel and demand, and also sort of lower supplies. So that's why cotton has been going up, that's why wheat has been going up, because weather has affected those crops. Supply has been back, and actually the US Department of Agriculture came out overnight and announced that there's been weather in Texas that is going to look like it's going to lower production for cotton. It's been a similar story in terms of wheats around the world. We've got Russia who's put in an export ban, and they've extended that export ban. So there's been a whole lot of mayhem going on with commodities in general at a time when demand has actually been relatively strong. We're starting to see some areas of the world emerge out of this sort of recession and starting to really get on their feet. So those two factors have been really positive for commodities, let alone the fact that when there's a whole lot of other problems going on around the world, then agricultural commodities actually look like a pretty good investment if you're looking at inflation. Now,
we got a lot of wool coming on stream December and January. Is that going to affect prices, do you think, globally?
Well, I mean, I think it would be naive to say that we're going to have these prices, when we've got a big amount of wool coming on the market here in New Zealand, because when we've got a big amount of supply coming on board, then you'd think that prices might soften a little bit. But at the same time, I wouldn't suggest that they're going to fall out of bed. We might see a little bit of softening. But prices are still going to stay strong and stay well above what they have been previously.
And U.S. beef prices are still staying strong as well. Tell me more.
Yeah, U.S. beef. I mean, that comes back to the supply story again. There's been some indicators coming out of the US that restaurant sales have been picking up a little bit. That's a good thing. So demand is sort of hovering around low levels, but when you consider what the supply issue is doing, then it's again we've got lower production, lower supplies. That's really been an underlying factor for prices, and I think that's going to continue. You can't change these things in a short period of time, so that's going to be positive over the next 12 months.
Lamb prices too looking positive moving forward in the new season?
Yeah, I mean, UK prices are just phenomenal. We thought this time last year that UK lamb prices were high. This year we're 25% higher, and when you put that in context, we're about 50% higher than what we would be on an average year. So lamb prices are extremely high. I'm actually pretty positive. You know, generally through this time of year, we'd start to see prices sort of fall. I think that is going to happen, but you know, they're going to stay well above what they have been over the past few years, even higher than last year. So, you know, on an average basis, then I think farmers are going to have a bit more in their pocket out of lambs in the year ahead than even what they did last year.
And James, in 60 seconds or less, the World Dairy Summit now going on in Auckland. This is a big deal.
A really big deal. I mean, we've got a massive amount of people here, and you know, I think we've got some of the top leaders in the dairy industry speaking. You know, they've got a lot to give in terms of, you know, trade policy, economics, where the industry is going. Sustainability is a huge part of it. That's one of the key drivers they're seeing as to going forward, and of course China driving where the market is going. So that's some of the key points that I've picked up so far.
That's great. And Fonterra now has changed the structure of its advance payout. How's it going to work for farmers?
Well, farmers get another 30 cents earlier on in the season. They've changed the advance from $4.30 up to $4.60. So that means the farmers are going to get a lot more money in the hand earlier on in the season. And then they've of course reconfirmed the total milk price at $6.60, which, you know, some people were picking with a higher exchange rate. It may have dropped, but you know, I think it's good news that it's stayed at these levels.
Thanks, James. Coming up after the break, crisis call. The kiwi fruit industry gathers in the war room to man their battle stations against a deadly virus threatening our kiwi fruit vines and our exports. You'll hear firsthand from Potash Corporation's Canadian CEO about why his company rejected BHP Billiton's foreign ownership takeover bid of a vital natural resource. And an update on the South Canterbury finance fiasco, with 2 more connected companies now in receivership. Not to mention all those other Alan Hubbard investigations underway, plus much, much more. But first, answer this in our Farmers' Facts and Figures quiz. What percentage of its 2010 income does the average U.S. family farm household receive from farm sources? Stay with us. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you, what percentage of its 2010 income does the average U.S. family farm household receive from farm sources? The answer, 11% of the average U.S. farm household income comes from farm sources. Almost 90% comes from off-farm jobs. And according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, more than half of all American family farms have gross annual sales of less than $10,000. Now, we'll talk about the U.S. and the U.S. economic meltdown shortly. But first, what's up with our kiwi fruit industry now fighting that invading blight? Joining us is Murray Weatherston, principal of Financial Focus. Murray, it's a dark day for the kiwi fruit industry.
Yes, it is, Genevieve. Anytime a major agricultural or horticultural industry gets a disease, it's sort of bad news. I think other countries might use it as an opportunity to start to ban some of our other imports, but probably the most immediate effect is actually on the orchardists in the area, because they must all be worried about their own short-term and perhaps long-term future.
James, what's your pick on it?
Well, I think it's serious. You know, kiwi fruit contributes a big part of agricultural exports and to the New Zealand economy, around $1 billion. So, you know, if this really does come through and it has a big impact on the vines, they've got to rip them out or something similar, then it could have severe impacts not only on that industry but on the wider economy and you know, I guess the longevity. So yeah, some big impacts.
Murray, the irony is, of course, that Zespri was just celebrating a fantastic season. The last shipments were just on their way out, and now this. It shows us how much we are at the whim of nature, if you like, of things going wrong in this economy. Has that changed at all over the years, do you think?
No, I think that risk is always there. I mean, the biggest risk that I think could ever hit the New Zealand economy would be if we were to get a dose of foot and mouth disease. I mean, that would be just absolutely catastrophic. For the horticulture industry, this might be, you know, similar sort of effect, quite catastrophic, if it turns out to be widespread.
Agriculture Minister David Carter this morning was saying that as far as he knows, nobody has stopped taking our kiwi fruit. The U.S. doesn't want our rootstock. Is it possible that we could be frozen out by countries that don't like us, that perhaps compete with us? James?
Well, we've already seen quite a bit of protectionism sort of coming through in the global marketplace. So we don't want to give we don't want excuses out there at all in terms of protecting their own economies and their own industry. So I think Murray sort of made the point that that there could be some impacts on different sectors. That'll be interesting to see how that unfolds, but certainly then they could look at locking us out of some markets in terms of this being a real threat and having an impact on their own consumers.
There's been a lot of transparency, Marie, right from the beginning. The public knew about it was, of course, when two of the big companies suspended trading on the stock exchange. Are we doing the right thing being so public? And I compare this to the milk scandal, the baby milk scandal in China, where officials knew what was going on and sat on it for a long time. Are we going to pay a price for being transparent about what our problems are?
Look, I just don't think we've got any choice but to be transparent. It would have become a pretty open secret in a very short period of time anyway, and to face up to the problems that their first when they first become apparent, I think is exactly the right thing to do. I mean, one of the problems is going to be I don't think anybody really knows, how widespread it is, what the impact is going to be. It'll be weeks, I think, perhaps even months before we really get a handle on this. And
how long, if it is bad news, how long before it starts to affect the economy, James?
Well, I mean, I guess probably through the next 6 to 12 months, and it could have an impact on the economy. We've already seen, after the news came out, then the dollar did fall because of what does that really mean for the New Zealand economy? It could have quite a big impact, of course, not only on reduction on exports and the income that New Zealand generates out of that, but also the impact that it has on the local communities and those specific areas where kiwi fruit's in those areas. So the Bay of Plenty, of course, could potentially be quite substantially affected by the loss of income from those farmers and those growers. So it's going to have different impacts on different areas of the country, but they could be quite severe. And coming back to Murray's point, I think we've done exactly the right thing by going out into the media and making this quite obvious, because our image is based on the clean green image, providing the right produce, and if we cover this up, then we're ruining that.
Okay, let's go to Japan now. They want in, apparently, or they're considering getting in to the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal. But John Key says they've got to let go of all their subsidies and protectionism for their agricultural products. This would be a big shift for Japan. Are you picking that the Prime Minister is going to be able to persuade the people that this is what they should do over there?
Well, I think there's going to be some big political changes occurring in Japan too. I mean, they've got their own pressures to get through. The fact that they're talking about it is great news. The fact that they are actually talking that they want to become part of the TPP, and they're actually talking about agriculture, being one of the stumbling blocks. They're going to have to address that, and whether that's going to happen in the next year or two, who knows? But we're on the right step. We're on the first step to making that transition, which is great.
All right.